Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to Orange Weekly, presented by Krause Health. My name is Brent Axe, and we are live on a number of channels today. Syracuse Orange Basketball on Facebook, Syracuse Orange Football on Facebook, the CNY Lacrosse Facebook page as well. We're live on Twitter and Syracuse Orange Sports on YouTube as well. Orange Weekly streams Thursdays about 1 o'clock, but you can always watch the replay on YouTube and on syracuse.com if you do miss the show. And a lot of news to get to today on a number of fronts, but the biggest thing, of course, is the news that we just got about an hour and a half ago. For those of you that have not heard, sure, most of you maybe have by now, but in case you haven't, a devastating injury for Syracuse basketball as we learned that Tuesday night, Jesse Edwards fractured his left wrist, and that is going to take Jesse Edwards out of the Syracuse basketball lineup for the rest of the season. So that is a significant development for Syracuse basketball, considering how well he's been playing this year, considering Syracuse's 4-game winning streak, considering what they have left to do, obviously, to stay in the conversation, as thin of a margin as they have to make a run here and be in the NCAA tournament conversation. Maybe that got even thinner. It was paper thin to start with, frankly. The room for error was nothing for this team. And now you take Jesse Edwards out of the picture, and it's going to make that mountain even more difficult to climb for Syracuse basketball. So your reaction to that, you guys jump in the comment section. We'll highlight some of those comments as we go. We'll also get to some lacrosse news as both seasons start this weekend. Syracuse women's lacrosse Friday night against Stanford, a top 13 matchup there, coming out of the gate with a strong game. And then the men's team starts with Holy Cross on Saturday. And of course, Syracuse men's basketball has got Virginia Tech on Saturday. That is a quad one opportunity, and Syracuse needs all the quad one wins it can get. They're currently 0-5 in that department, and only going to be made more difficult here by the injury to Jesse Edwards. So anything you guys want to add, make sure you do in the comment section, and we will highlight those as we go here. So certainly the news of Jesse's injury, first of all, what a bummer in the sense that this kid was having just a fantastic season for Syracuse. I think you had already carved his name into the most improved player award in the ACC. He had just significant jumps statistically. He had significant jumps in terms of awareness, confidence, where to be on the court, just everything. Just looked like the player that we saw flashes of in the past, and got to the point where, look, Syracuse was running their offense through Jesse Edwards, right? This was not just a, hey, look at this guy having a good season, good for us. No, he had started to play a very important role for this team. And Tuesday night, who would have thought it would be sort of a premonition of what Syracuse is going to have to do going forward? Now, Boston College may not be the best parameter to kind of judge, but they did have a couple of players in the paint. They had Point and they had Langford. They really harassed Jesse, really got after him, got him into foul trouble, which is always something that lingers with Jesse. That's like the one thing, right, that really lingers for Jesse Edwards. Got into foul trouble again, facing those big guys. And Boston College really emphasizes that. They really focus on that. They really get after whatever center they're playing, whatever big man is there. They did it against Baycott for North Carolina. And, they're not a very good team this season, certainly Boston College, but that's something they did well. And as it turns out, right at the end of the game, with about 3.5 minutes to go, when Jesse fouled out, is when he did hurt his wrist. Jim Boeheim told Ardana Datota today on syracuse.com. You can read that story. It's up now. He didn't even know he was injured, right? So it wasn't a case of he was hurt during the game and that affected his performance. The injury came late. They evaluated it and determined that he fractured his left wrist, and he is out for the season. So there is a couple of options there for this team. First is Frank Anselem. Now, Frank had his best game of the season Tuesday night in relief of Jesse, played 23 minutes. He had 5 points, 6 rebounds, a key block shot, productive, grabbing rebounds and dunking off loose balls, made a couple of great passes and rebounds that led to offensive possessions for Syracuse, needed offensive possessions. Frank has made steady improvement, but he's still rough around the edges. Jim Boeheim was even saying Tuesday night, I'll pull up the quote while we're talking about it here, about the centers for this team. Just give me a moment here to find it here, guys. But This is Jim Boeheim Tuesday night. It hurts not having Jesse in there for sure. Their big guy dominated Jesse completely, and Frank. I'm sure he had a career night. That's point, pardon me, for Boston College. That's not a good sign. I've known all along our centers have to be better. That's what got us beat earlier in the year. People took it inside and scored whenever they wanted to. That's what happened today. And this team doesn't have those kind of guys. They're going to score a lot. That's been a concern all along. So Jim Boeheim didn't really realize Tuesday night that he was looking ahead to what could be a problem for this team going forward. But Frank is an option. He gave Syracuse 23 minutes on Tuesday and 23 productive minutes. Can he do that consistently now down the stretch of the last 7-8 games of the season and into how far Syracuse goes in the postseason? That's a big question. People have been asking and wondering about Barama Sidibe. Barama Sidibe has played a total of 8 minutes this season. He's still fighting off injury, not completely healthy. Jim Boeheim told Donna DeToda today that he's had a couple of good practices lately, but if Barama was somebody who was making an impact at practice, he'd be in the games, right? Frank is getting it over him for a number of reasons. Maybe Barama wasn't quite going at it as hard as maybe he needed to, considering he wasn't getting the playing time. Nothing will wake you up like knowing, all right, kid, you're in. And he's not a kid. He's been around for a while. And Barama is somebody you just really got to feel bad for, too. This position's had a lot of rotten luck with injuries, adding it to Jesse. Barama came back for the 5th season, could have been a veteran leader on this team, and really somebody that stepped up for Syracuse. And now he's got the opportunity to do that again. He's been a leader off the court. He's been a leader, and just his presence of being around and guiding these young guys. And recall a couple of years ago, Barama was huge down the stretch for Syracuse. Light bulb went on for him, and he was a key contributor to this team, and he started to look ahead and say, man, what could he be? But injuries have just completely derailed what kind of player Barama can be, but he's got an opportunity now. The other option is you go small, right? The other option is you go small, and that puts Jimmy Boeheim at the center. So this is really going to be a matchup thing. When you can go small against certain teams, you do that. Frank's got to carry the load. He's going to have a lot of the same responsibilities that Jesse had. He's not the player that Jesse is. He's not as quick as Jesse. Jim was saying Tuesday night after the game that Frank still hesitates to jump in certain situations, doesn't leave his feet when he needs to in terms of grabbing rebounds and attacking the basket when he needs to. Frank is still raw. Frank is kind of where Jesse was last year. You can see the potential, but there's still a lot of rough around the edges stuff. So if anything, that's going to cause, people have been talking about it all year long. And hey, Benny Williams, you've certainly got the opportunity to get more minutes when Syracuse goes to that smaller lineup and contribute here. So it's a hodgepodge now. And to get to this point of the season, and Syracuse was starting to roll, they had figured out what they were, pick and roll, quite literally using Jesse in the offense, getting more out of Cole Swider. Cole Swider has been huge for this team in the last 4 games in their 4-game winning streak. So what happens now is opposing teams really had to pay a lot of attention to Jesse. Whereas before, it's like maybe we can absorb the impact of what he gives them on the offensive end, and you could draw him into foul trouble. And again, I think Boston College showed how that can be done in Tuesday night's game. But he got so good and so consistent. He was one field goal away from literally being the leader in the country in field goal percentage. He didn't qualify for it statistically. You need 5 made field goals per game. But I mean, this guy, 8 of 9, 7 of 9, just those numbers around the basket. Didn't have as many double-doubles as you would think. It wasn't always there on the rebounding end. But look, Jesse Edwards, clearly the most improved player in the ACC. And you can make an argument was the MVP of this team, period, right? So how you adjust, as we mentioned, is Frank, smaller lineup when needed, hodgepodge, and to do that on a whim, going down the stretch, wow. This is a team that's had its ups and downs, right? They had not won more than 2 games in a row until this current 4-game winning streak. It's the old Godfather line, right? Just when you thought you were out, they pull you back in. And now you look at how can they overcome this with 4 games in particular down the stretch. This was a no margin for error team as it was, right? So you can't lose games like the Boston Colleges of the world, who you get again next week. You've got a Georgia Tech coming up on February 21st, whose net ranking is very high or low, depending on how you want to look at it. Can't lose that game. Syracuse is 0-5 against quad one teams. I talked to Joe Lenardi this week, ESPN bracketologist. The story is up on syracuse.com if you want to check it out. And Joe said, look, it happens. There are teams in the mid-80s in the net ranking that start to get hot towards the end of the season. A few teams that are in the 50s and 60s can drop. Boise State is an example of that. Boise State was where Syracuse was earlier this year. They rattle off 14 wins in a row. All of a sudden, they're in an 8-9 game. The key was Syracuse has got to get some of these quad one wins. Virginia Tech is an opportunity there. Notre Dame down the road. Obviously, Duke coming up at the Dome in a few weeks. And how hard is it going to be for Syracuse to compete with Duke without Jesse Edwards in there? And North Carolina. Those are your 4 quad one games. Indiana may become a quad one win. Remember, Syracuse beat them earlier in the season in the 112-110 overtime game. But bottom line, this just got extraordinarily more difficult without Jesse. It puts more pressure on your outside shooters. You need all 4 guys now, being Joe Girard, Buddy Boeheim, Cole Swider, and to an extent, Jimmy Boeheim, to be hitting from the outside. Jimmy's going to be all over the place now. He's going to be in his natural position. He's going to be asked to play the 5 at times in the lineup. So how's that going to affect him and that adjustment? Bottom line is this is not the time of year you want to be messing with the lineup. This is the time of year you kind of know who you are and you ride that, right? And this is a team that was so dependent on its offensive game, and it will just put more pressure on those outside shooters to put up as much production as they can. And you get what you get out of Frank. You get what you get out of Barama when he can play. You get what you get out of Benny when he's in there. So I think you're going to see when they go to that smaller lineup, when they change things up and Symir Torrance is running the point. I mean, it's just it's the old cliche, guys, right? Next man up. Everybody's got to literally step up and either do something different or do something more, which they're already doing. Jim already plays a short bench as it is, but now everybody kind of shuffles up a position here. I didn't even mention John Bolajak and what opportunity that could bring him to get in these games as well. We've seen smatterings of him a little bit here and there, but certainly has not established himself as a key role player for this team as of yet. But as the expression goes, next man up here. So devastating news. You hate to hear it for anybody. You hate to hear injuries like that. Basketball, it happens. We've certainly seen it over the years, be it injuries or suspensions, players for whatever reason, as you go down the stretch out for this team. I remember Frank Howard a couple of years ago, right when they went into the tournament, right? Fab Mello back in the day, right when they went into the tournament, had some eligibility issues, and that turned into NCAA issues. But it's a mix of that. Injuries, you don't quite get as much in terms of basketball, but they happen. Guys tear ACLs, knee injuries typically. This is a fractured wrist. It's his left hand, by the way. So, one would think that easier to recover in your non-shooting hand going forward, and those injuries typically heal. Certainly not Dr. Axe, but those take about 6 to 8 weeks to heal, but then you got to get back into the flow of things. So he'll be good for next season, thankfully. This is not a year-long issue like an ACL or a knee injury where it typically takes about a year to recover. So that's the good news in that situation, and that he'll be good to go for next year. Obviously, the bad news is he is not going to play at all the rest of this season. So I've been highlighting some of your comments here, but just to react to them a little bit. Hope we don't see a lot of Jimmy in the middle. He's just not big enough. It's all about matchups, John. It's all about what kind of teams you're facing. You certainly wouldn't want that against, I know Boston College isn't very good, but you wouldn't want to play that lineup against BC. They had a couple of big men in there. Virginia Tech, rough and tumble team, comes at you, physical team, tough place to play. You don't want to go to that lineup unless absolutely necessary. And how players step up here, this is going to put a lot of pressure on Frank Anselm to show what he can do, because it's just a different mentality. When you're a bench guy, you're kind of coming in limited situations. But, hey, look, Frank knew Jesse was in foul trouble Tuesday, and I think he responded. But, you could still sense some hesitancy from Jim Boeheim and what kind of player he's got in Frank right now. But here we go. Never a better time to step up than when you are absolutely positively asked to do so. Alan says Williams has to contribute, can't just chuck up shots. Doug counters with, why not, buddy? Chucks up a ton of shots and goes 6 of 19. Yeah, he also scored 14 points in that game and was a big part of why Syracuse, was pacing ahead in the first half of that game, right? I mean, that's what Buddy's asked to do. I mean, sometimes shooters do that, 6 of 19, 7 of 20, whatever the case may be. Guy scored 14 points. That's what he's asked to do. I mean, could you cut it back a little bit? Sure. But shoot or shoot, Doug. That's how it goes, man. That's what this team is. If it was a different makeup and by the way, you're going to see those numbers go up even more. So buckle up, Buttercup, because those outside shooters going to be shooting a lot more now with, depending on what the lineup is. If Frank can show he can get some passes in the paint, he's been really good right around the basket, mostly reacting, but you're not necessarily running plays for him, right? So that's a huge adjustment because they were starting to run plays through Jesse Edwards. You're not running plays through Frank Anselm. So that's going to be a big, big adjustment for this team. The improvement's been remarkable this season, Jim notes. He's proven, contrary to what coach has said, that he's more than capable. Brian says, I could see Benny being a favorite defensively. His offense needs a lot of work. That's exactly it, Brian. And that's kind of atypical of the players that come up now. There's such a focus on offense. They want to score. They want to shoot threes, the Steph Curry effect and just the offensive explosion that we've seen in the game. Benny's offensive game needs a ton of work. Confidence isn't there. He likes to take that shot around the free throw line, but it's just not there for him. I think he's been holding his own defensively at 4 rebounds the other night, so he's contributing here and there. But you're going to need more out of Benny, too. I mean, we're focusing on the inside game, but the mixture and the variety of the lineups we're going to see, Symir's got to be better. Benny's got to be better. Frank's got to be better. Barama when he plays. If John Bull gets an opportunity, and like we said, this puts more pressure on your shooters. This puts more – this really affects is Joe Girard. Girard had established a real connection with Jesse. You could see in lockstep how they were. They were the two main catalysts for Syracuse's 4-game winning streak. If you really look at it, Cole Swider is certainly right up there too with how he's been shooting the ball. But now Joe has to make that adjustment. What kind of relationship does he have on the court with Frank? Have they been working on things at practice, right? So that there's a real streamlined connection that now has to, everything's got to be adjusted at this point, but that is a big one at this point. Austin notes that James Harden just got traded. Hey, there you go. Breaking news as we speak here. A lot of news out there in the basketball world. Austin, jump back in there. Give us the details of that. Was that the Sixers trade that was proposed for Ben Simmons? I'll look that up while we're talking about it here. But there you go. Lots of things happening in the basketball world today. As Alan notes, it's all a shooter's game at this point. Michael Antonio with a good point here, and I hope Benny can recognize this in the improvement in his game. If Benny pump fakes, takes off, could be a rim rocker, right? Does he have the confidence to do that? Does he have the ball handling to do that? All things that are in development at this point. So, man, I saw that news come across, and it takes your breath away. You feel bad for the player. This team was building up some momentum. I don't root for the team. I cover the team, but it's always more interesting when you see a team that's on a streak like that. The fans are getting back in. It had been a rough ride at times for the fans this year. They're straddling the 500 line. They're 2 games below 500, but through it all, look, this team fights. And I've got a kind of a mini column coming out, about an hour or so from now. I talked to Jimmy Boeheim this afternoon. The full interview will air later this afternoon if you're watching live Thursday afternoon on ESPN Radio Syracuse. And Jimmy said all the things that you would expect a team to say, that they've got to continue to fight, next man up, what his role is going to be going forward. That has not been a problem with this team, right? That's not been a problem. They do fight. They do play hard. The chemistry's there. Even through the worst moments, the loss to Pittsburgh, which was devastating. All those guys were devastated through that. They have stuck together. This is a team that plays together. They play hard. The chemistry is not an issue, but man, there's only so much you can take, right? So the grit of this team is going to be a challenge once again here. And look, Jesse will still be around. We'll still be encouraging these guys, but it's a big, big adjustment to make at this point of the season. So all that's going to be put to the test. Their grit and toughness is not been questioned. They just don't have the athletes to keep pace. And are they deep enough to win some of these games coming up? We mentioned the quad one opportunities that are there for this team. Jesse was such a huge part of that, right? And look, injuries are part of sports. We kind of forget how vulnerable these guys can be. One wrong step here or there, with the lacrosse fans that are watching in our CNY lacrosse page, that certainly with the women's lacrosse team, they've got Emily Harris-Chuck coming back and Megan Carney coming back, 2 of the best players in the country. They both went down with ACL tears last year. It happens in football, right? you're always an injury away. And particularly in football, everybody's playing hurt by the time you get deep 6, 7, 8 games into the season. It's just a matter of, are you hurt or are you injured? If you're injured, you can't play. If you're hurt, maybe you can play through it. This is an injury that Jesse could not play through. And it's always there. It's one of those things that, depending on what the news is and what the situation is, kind of goes here and there. But when an injury happens, who is it? How does it affect the team? In this case, it's it's devastating. It's a devastating injury for this team they've got to overcome. My guy Rob says open door for Williams, Sidibe, and Anselm, just open even wider with Jesse's unfortunate injury. As Van Halen once sang, it's right now. What are you waiting for? Great tune, by the way, there. And that's exactly the case at this point. Michael Antonio adding they can be deep enough if at least one bench player steps up and plays with reckless abandon. Could that be Frank? Could that be Benny? Could that be Barama? I saw Chris, you were asking earlier here, what is Sidibe's health right now? He's not 100%. This is a guy that's played 8 minutes this year, had just kind of fallen out of the rotation. Frank stepping up ahead of him. And, Jim Boeheim always draws that line somewhere. He had been practicing all along. Jim's noted he's had some good practices as of late. He's healthy enough to be playing and out there. He's not sitting out. But, man, those injuries pile up. And now the rust piles up. So you're going to throw him back out there with 7, 8 games to go and expect him to contribute. That's a big, big ask at this point because, you've got to be in that rhythm. You've got to be playing. You've got to know you're playing, right? And to go from cold, it's like warming up an old car in central New York when it's 5 degrees outside. Like, depending on how long that thing takes to heat up, you can't just throw him out there cold and expect to contribute. So he's not 100%, but he is playing and he is practicing. So there's I'm as curious as anybody what his contribution is going to be because we just haven't seen him this year. So that's the Jesse injury. That's the basketball stuff. Couple other notes here as we're on the CNY Lacrosse page and the football page. Not too much on the football and a couple more transfers for Syracuse this week. And, we talked to Nate Mink about this on the show last week. The schedule's out. Spring practice is around the corner. We know the Syracuse football spring game is going to be on the ACC network on April Fool's Day. Michael Johnson Sr. has been confirmed as the new wide receivers coach for Syracuse. That had been reported a couple of weeks back, but they confirmed that this week. Former Syracuse football coaches Doug Marrone and Paul Pasqualoni are back in the National Football League. Marrone is going to be on the New Orleans Saints, a place he had been before as the offensive coordinator. Paul Pasqualoni, the football lifer, he is going to be the new defensive line coach for the Carolina Panthers. So that news is out there in case you missed it this week. Syracuse picked up another transfer. That is Dartmouth transfer Isaiah Johnson, who brings some depth to what's already a pretty deep backfield for Syracuse with Deuce Chestnut, with Garrett Williams, remember, coming back. So added depth there. A new kicker is on board for Syracuse. Brady Denneberg gives Syracuse its third member of the class of 2022. He flipped and joined a couple defensive players in what was a pretty small signing day 2.0 class. So a few notes on the football end. Lacrosse fans watching are certainly excited because the season gets underway this weekend. You've got the women's team playing Stanford Friday night. I've got a cool story coming out tomorrow that I hope you guys can check out, how Megan Carney, who was one of the best players in the country last year till she unfortunately got an ACL injury and had to sit out the rest of the season, speaking of injuries, which we've been discussing, and Jay Brown, who plays for Stanford, they both tore their ACLs about a week apart. They grew up together in Dallas. They're best friends and actually went through their rehab together. And serendipitous, here it comes, first game of the season. They're getting first games back. They're facing off against each other as Stanford comes to the Dome tomorrow night. It's a top 13 matchup, going to be a good season opener for Syracuse women's lacrosse. And the expectations are high. I mean, this could be arguably a championship or bust team. A lot of great teams out there in the women's lacrosse world, right in the ACC that Syracuse has to face. Charlotte North and Boston College, North Carolina, Jamie Ortega and a loaded roster. Syracuse with a loaded roster. They have 8 of their 11 opponents, I believe, that are in the top 11 in the country on that schedule. So expectations are high. Kayla Trainer takes over as the head coach, and Syracuse women's lacrosse fans excited. The men's team, they consider themselves underdogs, right? Gary Gates in, Dave Petramala's in on the coaching staff, a lot of returning talent, notably Tucker Dorovic, notably Brendan Curry back on that team. Big blow for the Oranges. Owen Hiltz is out injured right now, as we talk about injury affecting a lot of these teams as of late. Both the men's and women's teams have to solve goalie issues. The big story to watch. The men's team has to replace Drake Porter, and the women's team has to replace Asa Goldstock in net. So huge storylines there for both teams. So lacrosse is in the air. It's going to be great to be talking lax going forward here. We'll finally have some games to react to when we get back at it on Orange Weekly next week. So it's happening on the lacrosse front, little smattering of news on the football front, but the big thing is basketball. So the Orange at 13-11, 7-6 in the ACC. They get Virginia Tech next. Just a reminder, we'll be with you on Syracuse basketball postgame following that game Saturday. A quad one opportunity and a prime opportunity as well for Syracuse basketball. As Anthony notes it here too, the trade went down. News is happening as we're speaking, folks. James Harden to the Sixers for Ben Simmons, pardon me. Huge basketball trade there. Wow. James Harden. James Harden's never happy anywhere. Not happy in Houston, plays his way out of there, goes to the big three. Obviously, Kyrie Irving can only play in certain situations due to his vaccination status and NBA rules there. With Durant, no, that's not good enough. Goes to the Sixers now. Ben Simmons, a great addition, I think, to Brooklyn. If now he's happy, he's locked in. He's not going to be asked to be a primary offensive threat on that team. But are you robbing Peter to pay Paul, I guess, if you're the Brooklyn Nets at this point, because now you're putting more pressure on Durant. We mentioned Kyrie's situation. So, hey, it's Orange Weekly. Not a lot of Syracuse-related notes there, but, hey, big news in the basketball world that everybody will be paying attention to there. And we'll end on this note. Rob asks, can you talk a little bit about Syracuse football's offseason moves? Rob, I'll tell you, look, my assessment on that is I think they've checked every box they need to. Getting Robert Anae and Jamie Beck from Virginia, huge offensive moves for an offensive-minded coach in Dino Babers. Now you can open up the offense a little bit, not put so much pressure on Sean Tucker. They brought in a quarterback, Dan Villari, a Michigan guy, but from Long Island, and a guy that wanted to go to Syracuse, and puts a little more competition in that room. I still think that it's Garrett Schrader's job to lose at this point, but I like that there's some additions there, right? They lost a lot of players in the portal, but they're starting to make some gains in the portal. The quarterback from Rutgers that they got, we just mentioned another corner that they added from Dartmouth, right? This team's got a lot of experience coming back. One of the, I think, top 15 teams in the country in terms of production returning, right? So you brought in the coaches. They address special teams, bringing in Bob Ligashevsky as the full-time special teams coach, which they needed. I love the offensive coaching hires. We'll see what Robert Anae does and what Jamie Beck does, but those guys are highly regarded, coming from Virginia, where, you had a top 3 offense in the country last year. Now, Brennan Armstrong, their quarterback, was a big reason for that. And Syracuse plays Virginia this year on a Friday night at the Dome. I believe it's September 23rd. I don't know the schedule right in front of me here, but it's a tough schedule. So, Rob, in terms of the offseason, and they're not done yet, they can keep adding players. I think they've done absolutely everything you can ask them to do. Now, they got to lock it in spring practice and obviously have great summer workouts and be ready to go. You got an ACC game to start with in Louisville. You got a tough non-conference slate. Purdue is not going to be an easy game. They've got a great quarterback, could be ranked preseason top 25. We mentioned the Virginia Friday night game. And, there's that stretch of the schedule where they play like NC State, Clemson, and I'm forgetting the third game in there, but a really tough stretch of the schedule. So there's no room for error. I mean, they got to make a bowl game, right? You can't just keep being right there and not get over the hump, particularly with some of the moves they made in this offseason. So you never want to say something like they won the offseason. What's up, Dan from Vancouver? Good to see you, my friend. You never want to say they won the offseason because that doesn't matter, but they did everything I think they needed to do in the offseason. It was a great response from them, and we'll see how it translates on the field at this point. So good question to end that note on, and appreciate you guys tuning in as always. Just a reminder that Orange Weekly streams live Thursdays at 1 o'clock on all these channels you're watching now. The YouTube clip goes up on our all of our social media accounts. We put a post up on syracuse.com as well. So in case you missed the show, you can always catch the replay. We'll be with you again Saturday night after Syracuse basketball takes on Virginia Tech on Syracuse basketball postgame presented by Krause Health is this show, also presented by our friends at Krause Health. And the Orange move on without Jesse Edwards. Just, man, you hate to hear it, especially with the season he was having, but major setback. Can the Orange overcome it? Or will it be too devastating to overcome? That question will start to be answered Saturday in Blacksburg. Thanks for hanging, everybody. We'll talk to you next time on Orange Weekly, presented by Krause Health.